If you're a landscape photographer, and I'm guessing you are if you're watching this video, then you know how important color is to landscape photos. That is, of course, unless you're shooting a lot of black and white. However, most of us are shooting color photos these days, so you know color is so incredibly important. Now, in this week's video, I'm going to be covering how to edit color in Adobe Photoshop. Now, Photoshop is my favorite program for post-processing, and obviously, you want to know how to master color editing in this program. So I'm going to show you guys three really cool adjustment layers that are going to allow you to directly affect colors to tone them in your image and make your image look great. So we're going to jump right in there. I'm using Adobe Photoshop 2021, but anything Adobe Photoshop should be about the same. The adjustment layers haven't changed in many, many, many years, so you should have these no matter which version of Photoshop you are running. So we're going to jump right into Photoshop, so let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to be using this photo as an example, which if you've watched some of my previous YouTube videos, you may have seen this photo before. It's a great thing to talk about when working with color because there's so many different shades of color in this image. We've got blues over here, we've got yellows and oranges over here, we've got purples here, we've got greens, we've got a wide spectrum of colors to work with. So there are three different adjustments that I use when I'm working with color. I'm going to talk about all three of those in this video and exactly why you'd want to use them. So to access those adjustments, you go down to this circle with a slash through it, which shows you your adjustment layers. You can click that. And the first one we're going to talk about is color balance. So to really dial in the colors, the first thing that I'm always trying to do with my images is to adjust the color balance, otherwise known as white balance. So this image looks pretty good already, but perhaps there is a few things that I would want to change. Maybe I felt that the image was too blue as a whole. I could bring this towards yellow. Or maybe I wanted it to be more green, more magenta. You have a few options here. Now, if you've used the Camera Raw filter or Lightroom to adjust white balance, you'll see that you actually have 3 sliders here, whereas in everything else you have 2. So this actually allows you to change between yellow and blue, green and magenta, which you would be able to do in Lightroom, but they also give you the option to change between cyan and red. And the best way to go about changing this is to just look at the image, and all that I did when I changed from blue to yellow, when I added a little bit of yellow back into the scene, is I was looking at the image and I felt that the whole image was just a little bit too blue. So I slid it slightly to the yellow. You can see the effect works in quite quickly. And another thing that you can do is don't get too concerned about the numbers here. What I like to do is grab this slider and go back and forth, and I'm not looking at the numbers at all, and I'm just going until I feel that it's balanced. Right about there is balanced for me, and you can do that with each slider. And I just want to go until I feel it's realistic. Right about there feels right to me. It is at 0, and the red maybe right in there, -1. So you can see I didn't do a huge adjustment here, but that is something that I'm always doing to my images. And remember that trick that when you're sliding these sliders here, don't look at the numbers because you don't need to be too concerned about it. Slide it too far one way, too far the other, and then kind of dial it in exactly where it feels right and where the image looks the most realistic. Now, you can go through and change the shadows or the highlights. I personally don't really use this feature too often because I think there's better ways to tone the shadows and the highlights. So don't worry too much about that. Just leave the tone on midtones. Now, the next thing that I use to affect colors is back down here in the adjustments, and I'm going to go to hue saturation. Now, this is pretty much your go-to for anything color in the image. It's going to allow you to do thousands of different things to your image, pretty much do whatever you want. You can do it here in the hue saturation. So let's just have a few examples here. Let's say that we wanted to adjust the color of these flowers. Now I could do that by going down to magentas and doing whatever I want. Maybe I wanted to increase the saturation. Maybe I wanted to change the hue, change the lightness, whatever it may be. So let's say, for example, I wanted to increase the saturation and maybe I want to change the hue. So you can see I can change the flowers to be really any color that I want. Maybe I want to make them more purple. I'll increase the saturation. And now one thing that you'll notice if we zoom in here is that it's not making the best selection of the flowers. You can see some spots are getting left behind. So that is where these really cool eyedroppers come in handy because I can use this eyedropper to make a more selective adjustment. So right here shows the sample of the colors that I'm selecting. Now, basically what this bar means here is that these two straight up and down lines in the middle, everything between that, any color that lands in this range, is being 100% selected. Whereas as you go further away, between the left side and that middle and the right side and that middle is going to be spots where the colors aren't being totally selected. But what I can do is click on this plus here, and I'm just going to go in and sample the colors. So let's toggle this again. You can see that we're not doing a very good job of selecting these pinks like right in here. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and we'll add that to the sample. Now you can see it's doing a little bit better job selecting. I'm going to add these pinks over here. Now you can see that we've really increased the size of our sample here. So let's zoom back out, and we will toggle this. And now we can make adjustments as needed. So that is starting to look pretty good. Now the other thing that I could do here is perhaps I wanted to reduce the saturation of the blues. I'm actually going to create a new hue and saturation layer here. And I'm going to go down to blues. And let's say that I wasn't 100% positive. These are obviously blues, but I'm not sure if they would fall into the cyans category or if they would truly be blues. So I'm going to go down to this eyedropper, and this time we're going to select the eyedropper that does not have a plus or a minus. Remember, before we used plus to add to the sample. This time we're just going to use the one that doesn't have any symbol next to it. That's going to allow us to choose a color. And as I click, you can watch over here to watch this sample change. So I'm going to click up here, and you can see now that we've got a little bit better sample than we did before. Now I can adjust this, and it's looking good. So let's reduce the saturation, but I don't want to affect the sky too much. I just kind of want to reduce the saturation down here. So I'm going to lower the saturation, but now you can see it's doing a lot to the sky. So one thing that you can try, and I'm not sure if this is going to work or not, but it is always worth trying, is to use the eyedropper with the minus, and that means that we are going to subtract a color from the sample. So now I'm going to click into the sky, and now you can see that we've saved some of the sky. You can see now that our sample is really, really small, but we have done a pretty good job of reducing the saturation here and not as much in the sky. Now these changes aren't crazy large changes. This photo is already partially edited, which is why the colors are so bright as is. But in your photos, you may be making a lot bigger changes than this, but this makes a really great example for showing how you can use all of these tools to do this. Let's say that, for example, I wanted to make these greens just a little bit more green and less yellow. I would just slide this hue slider up here to the right. You can see this can obviously get out of hand pretty quickly, so you got to be careful with it. But right about there. Now, one thing that a lot of my clients will ask is, what about this lightness slider? I'm not a huge fan of the lightness slider because, as you can see, it generally just tends to totally darken out your color or totally brighten out your color, one or the other. But I'm actually going to show you guys a little bit better way that if you wanted to adjust the lightness, which would basically increase the brightness of the color, making it a little more white or a little bit darker, making it a little more black. That is what that tool is designed to do. But in this hue saturation adjustment, it doesn't do a great job. So the way that I actually do that is by going down here and going to the selective color. Now, the selective color is a really cool tool that not a lot of photographers are out here using because the hue saturation does cover such a wide range of things that I honestly don't even find myself using selective color too terribly often either. But I want to show you guys how to use it because it's a great tool. And if you learn how to use it, it's really going to help you in the long run. So to use this tool, we're going to go to colors and we're going to select the color that we want to work on. We want to work on greens, I believe, or actually those are yellows as we established before. So we're going to go to yellows. Now, the really cool thing about this is that we are going to be able to add cyan, magenta, or yellow to the yellows already, or blacks, which would basically darken or lighten. So we're going to add a little bit of those colors to this particular color here. So if we add cyan, you can see it makes it more green. If we reduce cyan, it makes it a little more orange. And you don't need to memorize exactly what each one of these does. You can simply just slide the sliders until it gets to somewhere that you like. But the one thing that is nice about this tool is that when you add blacks or reduce blacks, it generally tends to look a little bit nicer than it does in the hue saturation. So you don't want to go overboard because you can see it just looks pretty crummy. But by doing like -20% or +20%, you can actually pop it quite a bit. So you can see now that these greens are really popping a little bit more than they were before. And I could also go in here and adjust and make them more green, or whatever I wanted to do could be done in here. So this is just some simple color adjustment here. And as I mentioned before, there's hundreds of different ways that you can go about adjusting the color. I could adjust this color up here if I wanted. Just there's so many different ways, but definitely do give this selective color a try. See what you like. It can do everything that the hue saturation can do, except for you cannot sample a color. So it's definitely feasible to think that you could use selective color instead of hue saturation. But I did want to show you guys both of those tools to let you guys decide exactly which one works best for your personal workflow. All right, everybody, that wraps up what I had to say about color. I really hope this tutorial was helpful for you guys. As always, I really recommend putting this YouTube video up aside next to one of your own images. Maybe you watch this video on your cell phone, on a different computer. You put it up on the side of the screen, whatever it is, and follow along with exactly what I'm doing to your own image. This is really going to be how you will learn best. So go ahead and give that a shot. Of course, if you have any questions about anything related to color in Photoshop, please let me know in the comments of this video. I would be so stoked to help you guys out. And as always, I really appreciate you guys checking out my video. So thank you guys so much for checking this out, and we will see you guys next weekend. Have a good one. Bye-bye.